Colorado, a land of towering peaks, winding rivers, and vast stretches of quiet wilderness. Yet, hidden behind every scenic overlook and beneath the endless canopy of pines, something strange and unsettling might lurk. Now, 3 tales from the Centennial State offer a glimpse into that darker side of its untamed beauty. A park ranger's shocking discovery in Rocky Mountain National Park that defies all logic. A father-son hunting trip deep in the San Juan National Forest that ends in terror. And a camper's horrifying brush with the unknown among the shifting sands of the Great Sand Dunes National Park. These are accounts of ordinary people venturing into places where nature holds secrets older and perhaps more dangerous than we ever imagined. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. Now prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. Have you ever felt the deep woods pressing in on you, practically breathing down your neck? Beneath ancient pine boughs and jagged mountain peaks, a park ranger in Colorado stumbles upon a secret, one that tests the limits of imagination and ignites a conspiracy that might just rewrite everything we think we know about. I need you to hear it straight from me before the story gets twisted into something it's not. My name is Steven, and I've been working as a park ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park for the past 12 years. For a long time, I thought I'd seen about everything this park can throw at you. Blizzards in July, snowmelt flooding, and raging elk in the rut. But let me tell you, I had no way of preparing for what happened to me recently. I was on a routine patrol about 3 weeks back, near the Wild Basin area. If you're familiar, that section of the park sees fewer tourists than spots like Bear Lake or Trail Ridge Road. It's rougher terrain, thick forest, and the trails can be a bit tricky in places. Honestly, that's always been part of the appeal for me. Less noise, more time to tune into the sounds of nature. That morning, everything felt off. The birds were quieter than usual, and there was this tension in the air, like static waiting to snap. I told myself, it was just my imagination, maybe because a storm was rolling in. But it sure didn't feel like the kind of hush before a rain shower. I followed a narrow side trail that only seasoned hikers take. Sometimes you find lost campers or folks who have no business being off the main paths, so I had my radio in one hand and my bear spray in the other, just in case. As I was pushing through a stretch of dense undergrowth, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart jump to my throat. It looked like a cluster of low mounds, lined up way too uniformly to be natural. At first, I thought maybe it was an abandoned campsite, or maybe even some old homestead site from decades ago. I walked closer, and that's when the smell hit me, earthy, musty, like something long decayed. The shape of each mound was, well, too small to be a normal burial site for a human, but definitely too large to be for small game. There were stones arranged around them, in a pattern that didn't look like any tradition I'd seen from local tribes or historical settlers. It was the kind of arrangement that makes your mind start to put pieces together in all the worst ways. My gut tightened, and I could almost feel eyes on me, though I didn't see a soul around. At that point, I'm trying to stay calm, reminding myself I'm here to protect the park and everything in it. But that creeping dread. It was like the forest knew I was intruding on something not meant to be found. My first thought was, who the hell would build a makeshift graveyard up here? I knelt down, brushed aside some of the pine needles and loose dirt on the nearest mound, and that's when I uncovered a partial bone. I'm no forensic expert, but I know enough about wildlife remains to guess this wasn't from an elk or a deer. It looked closer to a human forearm, yet thicker, more robust. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. While I was trying to make sense of it, a rustling in the thicket made me jump. I swear to you, I spotted a tall shape, something upright and massive, dark hair covering most of its silhouette. It disappeared so quickly that if I'd blinked, I'd have missed it. Bigfoot sightings around here aren't exactly a nightly campfire story. People mention them occasionally, but I'd never paid them much attention. Now, faced with that massive figure and the weird feeling of being watched, it hit me like a sledgehammer. I think that might have been one of those cryptid creatures folks talk about. But it didn't feel mythical or silly. It felt terrifyingly real, and it let out this low, rumbling sound that made my arms break out in goosebumps. Part of me wanted to turn and run, but I stayed put, holding my bear spray in front of me like it'd do any good. After a few beats, the movement stopped, and the forest went silent again. The sudden quiet rang in my ears. I made up my mind to hightail it back to the station and radio for backup. Let me tell you, those were the longest miles I've ever hiked in my life. Every crack of a twig behind me sent my pulse to new heights. I couldn't shake the sensation that something, or someone, was following. When I finally got out of there, I told my supervisor and a couple of close colleagues what I'd found. At first, they thought it might be some twisted prank, maybe leftover from the early 1900s or some eccentric's idea of a practical joke. But I was insistent. I convinced them to come with me the next morning. We brought a small team, along with a local sheriff's deputy who occasionally joins us on search and rescue. Funny enough, we didn't see the large creature again, but I felt it. That presence. Like it was keeping an eye on us from behind every trunk. Once we arrived at the spot, it didn't take long to confirm everything I'd said. And that wasn't even the biggest shock. Someone from our team, Dan, who's got an eagle eye for details, spotted what appeared to be two oversized skulls poking out from under the dirt in one of the bigger mounds. They were huge, shaped almost human, but with heavier brows and jawlines that jutted out like an ape's. I've seen plenty of mountain gorilla skulls in pictures, but these were different. We carefully lifted away the topsoil, and I remember hearing someone behind me gasp. You could see massive conical eye sockets, thick bone ridges. It's one thing to imagine some fabled half-man, half-ape cryptid. Another thing entirely to be staring at what might be physical evidence of it. We decided to bag these remains up and send them off to a lab for analysis. Nobody wanted to risk them getting exposed to the elements before we could figure out exactly what they were. As far as I know, they ended up on a truck heading to some forensic facility. Not sure if it was a state lab or something more specialized. And that's where it all starts to get even stranger, because all I've heard since then is that the skulls were never returned. No official statement, no acknowledgement of their whereabouts. It's like they vanished into thin air. I've called in a few favors, tried to get a hold of someone with enough rank to provide answers, but every response has been vague. We're looking into it, or I haven't seen any report come through. Now my mind's racing with all the stories that swirl around these mountains. And to think, I found what looks like a burial ground. Who's burying these remains? The same creature I glimpsed? Is it some clan of Bigfoot out here preserving their dead like we humans do? It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but seeing those bones with my own eyes changed everything. Interestingly enough, I've met a few hikers over the years who shared small details, stories of giant footprints found near the alpine lakes, sightings of tall, furry silhouettes darting through the trees. One older man from Grand Lake swore he once saw a creature carrying what looked like a deer carcass slung over its shoulder. He'd never shared that openly because he didn't want to be ridiculed. Now, I'm thinking maybe he was telling the truth all along. We're left with more questions than answers. Who do the skulls belong to? Why did they vanish from the lab with no explanation? And what about that fleeting shadow that seemed to watch every step I took in the woods? The deeper I dig into this, the more it feels like we were never supposed to see it. I can't help but wonder if there's a bigger story behind these silent guardians of the forest. My coworkers have shut down whenever I bring it up now, like they're scared of where this might lead. The deputy who came with us has since refused to talk about it at all. I don't know what folks out there will make of my story, but I'm putting it out there anyways. There's something out there, and it's more organized and intelligent than we've given it credit for. If you hear of any developments on these missing remains, or if someone comes forward with some knowledge about the lab that took them in, please let me know. Until then, I'll be looking over my shoulder every time I step into those woods. Stay safe out there, everyone. And if you do venture into the remote corners of Rocky Mountain National Park, keep your eyes open. You never know what might be watching. So there it is, an encounter with a phenomenon that defies simple explanation, a glimpse of something large and living in the wild, and the discovery of clues that could, potentially, rewrite the boundaries between fact and fiction. Yet, crucial questions remain unanswered. Now, let's venture into the vast wilderness of Colorado's San Juan National Forest. Father and son, eager for a familiar thrill of the hunt. But what they found, far from the well-worn paths, was a force neither expected nor understood. I'm writing this with trembling hands, still recovering from what my son and I endured in the San Juan National Forest earlier this month. My name's George, I'm 63 years old, and I've hunted in these parts ever since I was a teenager. My father took me out on hunts north of Pagosa Springs decades ago, and I've always felt at home among the lodgepole pines and spruce. But I've never experienced a terror quite like the one that nearly took my son from me. We headed out the third week of elk season, end of October, hoping to set up around the upper reaches near the Piedra River. We planned to camp well away from the main roads to avoid the crowds that sometimes come off Highway 160. My son, Eric, he's 35, tagged along like he always does when he's able to get off work. He's a good shot, but more important, he's got that love of the wild in him that I've always admired. The plan was simple. Hike in about 7 miles, set up camp near a small tributary we know, then spend a week chasing elk through the thick timber. We'd done it before, no problem. From the moment we stepped off trail, though, something felt different. The forest was unnervingly still. Sure, now and then you'll get a quiet morning with barely any bird calls, but this wasn't one of those typical events before a storm. It felt watchful, if that makes any sense. Usually, you get squirrels chattering or crows cawing from overhead. But that day, it was as if the entire woods were holding its breath. We set up camp just a little northwest of the junction between East Fork and West Fork of the San Juan. That evening, as the temperature dropped and the wind started to kick up, we heard a sound that made my scalp prickle. It wasn't a wolf, and it sure wasn't any coyote I've heard in these parts. It was deeper, more resonant, almost like a moan that stretched into a throat-ripping howl. We looked at each other with wide eyes. Eric whispered that maybe we'd pitched camp too close to a bear's territory, but I've encountered plenty of bears, and none of them ever made a noise like that. About midnight, I was awakened by movement around the campsite. We'd strung up our food so bears wouldn't rummage through, but something or someone was rustling near the tents. The next morning, we found footprints around the perimeter, huge footprints, longer than any size 14 boot I've seen, and broader too, like they belonged to some creature with a massive weight behind it. I started wondering if it was a prank, but we were miles from the nearest real trailhead, and these prints weren't shaped quite like human footprints. They looked longer in the toes, and the arch was kind of odd. Eric got anxious and said maybe it was time to head back, but I was stubborn. Told him we'd stay one more night, see if the wind changed. The second night was when things really escalated. The same unearthly howls echoed through the pines, this time closer. I felt every hair on my neck stand up. Right around 2 a.m., Eric bolted upright in his sleeping bag, and I heard him muttering that something was messing with the corner of our tent. I unzipped to peer outside, and the smell hit me first. A rank stench, like wet dog, mixed with rotting vegetation. Then I spotted what looked like a tall silhouette just beyond the glow of our dying campfire. It was broad-shouldered, impossibly tall, and covered in hair that gleamed in the faint moonlight. I grabbed my rifle, heart pounding so loud I could barely think straight. The figure just seemed to vanish between the trees before I could fully make it out. I told Eric we needed to leave at first light. I'd heard enough old local stories about large, hairy bipeds roaming these mountains, stories I always shrugged off as tall tales or misidentifications. But after seeing that shape and smelling that awful odor, my head was swimming with all those whispered campfire accounts of Bigfoot-like creatures in the San Juans. No matter what it was, we were done being there. Come morning, we packed up quickly. It felt like every twig snap in the forest set me on edge. As we were making our way down a narrow ravine, we heard the howls again, so close that I practically felt it vibrating my chest. Eric was leading, scanning the area, when suddenly he slipped on loose gravel and tumbled down a small embankment. He landed hard on his right leg, and the way he screamed told me it wasn't just a bruise. I scrambled down after him, rifle slung over my shoulder, adrenaline crashing through my veins. I found him with his leg bent at a nasty angle, broken, or at least severely sprained. We were stuck in that ravine with a thick canopy overhead, limiting the sunlight. The sense of being watched came back stronger than ever. Eric was in pain, trying to keep still while I bandaged him up as best I could. That's when we both heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, on the ridge above us. I remember Eric looking at me with pure panic. He whispered that he saw a dark figure moving in and out of the trees. I tried to keep calm, told him we had to move whether he could walk or not. I half-dragged, half-carried my son, watching the ridgeline whenever I could. At one point, I caught sight of it. Tall, bulky, definitely upright, and covered in dark fur. We were two grown men, one of us armed, yet we felt completely vulnerable. That presence was tracking us. Every so often it would let out a grunt or a huff, and we'd hear branches snapping in the distance. In all my years of hunting, I've never felt like the prey before. But in that moment, I was sure we weren't the predators anymore. Maybe it was divine luck, but we managed to get to a more navigable section of the forest where the slope flattened. I helped Eric limp along, and after what felt like an eternity, we came upon a group of campers. They were from Farmington, New Mexico, up for some weekend backpacking, and they looked as shocked as we were. They could see the terror on my face, and one of them had a satellite phone they let me use to call for rescue. Meanwhile, all around us was that suffocating quiet again, broken only by the occasional snapping of twigs in the distance. Eric was rushed to the nearest hospital in Durango later that day. He needed medical attention for his leg. Turns out, he'd fractured it. To this day, he still limps a little, but the real damage was more emotional. He's reluctant to talk about it, and whenever someone brings up Bigfoot sightings or weird howls in the woods, he practically shuts down. I can't fully explain what we encountered out there. I can only testify to what I saw, a massive, upright figure with a terrible smell, and a voice that could shatter the silence of the forest for miles. Some folks in nearby towns, like an old friend of mine in Bayfield, claim they've heard similar howls drifting through the trees late at night. Others remember hearing local Ute legends about wild men in the mountains. I've always been a skeptic of tall tales, but after that trip, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. I'm sending this to you because I know you cover stories like these, and I want folks to hear it raw. If anyone else has had experiences like ours in the San Juans, I'd sure appreciate knowing we aren't alone in what we endured. My son and I are lucky to have made it out with our lives, because there were moments I wasn't sure we would. If that deep, bone-chilling howling starts up, get out of there fast. It's not worth risking your life to see what might be lurking behind the next tree. Stay safe out there, everyone. So, a father's bond and a son's survival, tested by an unseen predator deep in the Colorado wilderness. Was it an elusive cryptid or simply a beast of the forest few have encountered? The questions linger like an unearthly echo in the silence. Now, let's venture to the towering dunes of Colorado's high desert. There are tales that refuse to drift away with the wind. One camper ventured too far along the trails of Great Sand Dunes National Park. What was experienced there, alone, vulnerable, surrounded by shifting sands, would haunt him long after the footprints faded and the dunes reclaimed their shape. I've been stewing over this for weeks, wondering if I even wanted to share what happened. There's a voice in the back of my head telling me I probably shouldn't, that folks are just going to call me delusional. But there's another part of me that needs to get it out, if only to find some kind of relief. I camped at Great Sand Dunes National Park a few weeks ago, right before the busy summer season. The plan was just to get away from city clamor and clear my mind among the dunes. I'd been there a few times in the past, once with friends for a quick day trip, but never overnight. This time, I wanted the full experience, sleeping under the stars near Medano Creek, waking up to the sun cresting over those massive mounds of sand. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late May. The weather was a mixed bag. A breeze kicked up flecks of sand, stinging any exposed skin. I still remember the feeling of those tiny grains working their way into every fold of my jacket. Still, I was excited. The place was quiet, maybe a dozen or so people milling around the visitor center. A ranger mentioned the creek levels were a bit low for this time of year, but that it happens sometimes when the snowmelt from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains is slow. I shrugged it off, thinking it wouldn't matter much. I wasn't there to splash around after all. By early evening, I set up my small tent near one of the designated backcountry sites, not far off the Sand Ramp Trail. The sun was still blazing over the dunes, painting everything gold. It was mesmerizing to watch the shadows shift as the light began to fade. Around dusk, I saw a couple heading back to the main campground. They waved politely and mentioned they'd heard odd yips or howls on the far side of the dunes. They joked that maybe coyotes were getting bold, or that something bigger was lurking. Their comment gave me a slight chill, but I brushed it off. I grew up in rural Colorado. Coyotes aren't unusual. But looking back on it, I wonder if they were trying to warn me about something more than just normal wildlife. I settled in for the night, listening to the soft whistle of the wind across the sand. It's a strangely soothing sound, almost musical at times. Everything was calm until around midnight, when I heard a series of sharp, distant cries that definitely weren't coyotes. They were pitched too high, like a distressed scream, then followed by a lower growl that echoed off the dunes. It made the hair stand up on my arms. I told myself it was nothing. My imagination. Maybe some kind of fox or an owl with an odd call. But the feeling in my gut was telling me otherwise. I managed to drift off eventually, but sometime in the early hours, I woke with a jolt. My tent was rattling, and there was this scraping sound, like something dragging across the nylon. My heart hammered as I tried to listen, to figure out if it was just the wind. But the wind doesn't sound like that. I held my breath, hoping whatever it was would move on. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek outside. All I saw was darkness and the faint shapes of the dunes. No movement, no sign of anything unusual. But something must have been there. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I went for a hike out toward High Dune, where you get that sweeping view of the entire field of sand rolling off toward the base of the mountains. It was supposed to clear my head, but I found myself glancing over my shoulder. The wind whistled around me, and every time it did, I felt goosebumps. I saw a couple of hikers that morning, a young guy and a woman who said they came up from Alamosa for a day trip. They mentioned the winds had been picking up at night, carrying all sorts of strange noises. At the time, I wanted to press them if they'd heard anything like I did, but I hesitated. I didn't want to sound paranoid. That afternoon, I tried exploring a part of the park near the transition where the dunes meet the grasslands. I've read about how the ecosystem changes in that zone, the unique wildlife tracks you can spot in the sand, mule deer, pronghorn, the occasional black bear. Near a stand of cottonwoods, I found footprints that didn't match any animal I recognized. They were elongated, almost human-like but too wide, with a weird gap where the arch should be. I stared at them way too long, convincing myself it was just distortion in the sand. Looking around, though, I didn't see any other signs of people. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled again. By late afternoon, storm clouds started gathering over the Sangre de Cristos. I was torn about whether to pack up and leave. Part of me thought I was being ridiculous. I'd driven all this way and I wanted to enjoy it. But the sense of unease clung to me. I decided I'd give it one more night. If anything weird happened again, I'd leave in the morning. Maybe I should have left right then. That night, the wind died down to a near stillness, which actually felt more unsettling than the gusts. Around 10 p.m., I heard a faint crying noise, like someone whimpering. It was eerie to hear such a sound echo off the dunes. Then it shifted into what I can only describe as a guttural moan. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it could be the wind funneling through the valleys. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That moan sounded sentient, anguished. I clutched my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. What I saw under the moonlight, though it wasn't super bright, was a silhouette at the crest of a dune about 50 yards away. It had a hunched posture, taller than any person I've seen, and it was moving with this disturbing, jerky gait. Its head swiveled unnaturally, as if it was scanning the terrain. There was a moment where it seemed to pause and lock onto me. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. In the faint glow, I thought I could make out limbs that were too long, arms that dangled closer to the ground than a normal human. My rational mind kept trying to categorize it as a trick of light or shadow, but it sure didn't look like that. Then, it let out another moan, low at first, rising into a pitch so sharp I physically winced. I fumbled back into my tent, hands shaking so bad I could barely zip the door. For what felt like hours, I sat there, listening for movement. I thought about packing up, but the idea of stumbling around in the dark with that thing out there made me too terrified to move. Eventually, it went quiet. I don't think I slept more than a few minutes, dozing off now and then with my flashlight still clutched in my hand. At first light, I stumbled out of my tent, half expecting to see footprints or some sign that it had crept closer. I found nothing. The sand near my tent was smooth, just faint ridges from the wind. A part of me questioned my own sanity. Maybe I'd had a night terror or something. But the memory of that silhouette and that horrible sound sat too vividly in my mind. I decided right then I was done. As I was rushing to break down my campsite, another camper came by, an older gentleman wearing a floppy hat. He looked at me like he understood something was wrong. He mentioned that he'd heard awful noises in the early morning hours and assumed it was some large animal in distress. I almost blurted out everything, but I just nodded and tried to play it off. Before I left, he warned me to be careful, that the area had plenty of legends about things roaming the dunes at night. He was vague, but the way he said it made my stomach clench. Driving out of the park, I glanced back at those dunes. They looked so peaceful and majestic from a distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and unknown lurks among them. I told a few close friends once I got back home, and most of them chalked it up to stress or an overactive imagination. But I was there. I heard what I heard. I saw that figure. There's enough unexplained strangeness in the San Luis Valley already. UFO sightings, cryptid reports, you name it. Perhaps the dunes have secrets of their own, far more unsettling than any rumor I've heard. I hope that others might share this story if they've experienced anything like this. Because I'm torn between wanting someone else to confirm I'm not alone and hoping no one else has gone through such a frightening ordeal. I may go back someday, but not by myself, and certainly not without some serious caution. Whatever is out there, it feels like it doesn't want to be found, but also isn't afraid to let you know it's watching. Stay safe, everyone. If you venture into Great Sand Dunes National Park, be respectful of the land, but keep your eyes open after dark. You never really know what's out there until it's too late. Just another lone camper, entranced by the natural beauty of high desert dunes, found himself ensnared in a mystery no footprints could easily explain. Was it a living creature of flesh and bone, or something far stranger lingering among the shifting sands? These questions linger like echoes in the moonlight, haunting anyone who dares look past the wind-sculpted ridges in search of answers. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.